Hello, good morning, everyone. It is so great to see so many of you, and I hope you all are enjoying the end of Fest 1. And as many of you know, today is one of our favorite days, which is Crossover Day. So Fest 1 will be sadly leaving us, and Fest 2 will be joining us. But this afternoon, the exciting part is we'll have all of Fest 1 and Fest 2 on campus. So we'll have an amazing set of leaders and thinkers from across the spectrum. Today's session is one that's really important to me when I'm not spending time here at the Aspen Ideas Festival as a senior fellow helping to produce the economic content for the Ideas Festival. I actually lead a small business organization. And so small businesses, as many of you know, are so key to our economy and our society. And today we want to have that conversation. And it's such an important conversation as we're thinking about the transition that our economy is going through. And for many of you who've been part of the Prosperity Reimagined track this session, we've been exploring different avenues of that. And so today we'll think about that through industrialization and through the small business prism. Before I turn it over to our amazing moderator who's going to introduce our panelists, I did just want to put a plug in. So in this room, in 10 minutes after this session ends, we're going to have an amazing set of business leaders from the millennial perspective talking about how they're coming into business leadership and how they're thinking about it. A crew of them are actually sitting over here right now. So please join us after this session as well. But for now, let's turn to this amazing topic. It's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to someone who's a friend, a mentor, and colleague. That's Justin Nelson, who leads the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. So, Justin, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rhett. And I'm going to echo that, and not just because one used to work for me, one is an amazing leader on my team, and one's a great partner organization. It will be a wonderful panel. Well, first of all, welcome this morning to this conversation. We have three amazing panelists. To my immediate left here is Carolina Martinez, the CEO of the Cameo Network, an association representing over 400 lenders, training programs, chambers of commerce, job creators, agencies, and individuals dedicated to business development and furthering small business. So welcome, Carolina.
Thank you, Justin.
Next to Carolina, we have Ashutosh Padi, who is a senior partner and the global leader of firm strategy at McKinsey & Company. He also happens to be the co-author of the book, The Titanium Economy. And I have to say that that book is a roadmap for business builders. What you have laid out in there is something that I think anyone that is looking at how they innovate, how they use human capital differently, how they reinvent, and how they work sustainably will learn a great deal from that. And we're going to talk more about that. But before we get to that conversation, I would like to introduce our last panelist, certainly last but not least, Mr. Chris Womack, the chairman, president, and CEO of Southern Company, one of the largest leading energy providers serving over 9 million customers across our nation. So welcome to all of you panelists.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And welcome to all of you in the audience. Let's go ahead and get started on this conversation around the next industrial revolution powered by small and mid-sized businesses. First question to you, Carolina. Much is being said about this new industrial revolution, but this moment encompasses far more than advances in manufacturing, as some may be thinking. It includes innovation, inclusion, and regional economic renewal. From your vantage point, can you help define what this moment truly entails, maybe set the scene for this conversation, and how small and mid-sized businesses will and are helping to shape it?
Thank you, Justin. It's great to be here. And this is such an interesting topic. And I wanted to start just getting a little bit of a sense from the audience. And when you talk about industrial revolution, it's like, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? And just kind of shout it and let us know. 1800s. I'm sorry? 1800s, so 1800s, factories, power. Yeah. And I think that's such an interesting thing. The first time I heard about the title of this session, I started thinking about, maybe it's just the machines, the big old factories, the even kind of the steam engine, right? Like we're thinking about all that. And it is really interesting because we're in a new area and we're thinking, and in the past couple of days, I've been hearing about manufacturing, which is what we end up when we talk about these factories. And I don't know, when I think about it, and I think about the businesses we work with that are maybe bakeries or candy shops or makeup line producers or coffee roasters, we don't think about manufacturing or about industrial, right? We think about small businesses. But that got me thinking a lot about, well, what is the definition of manufacturing? And I'm not an AI person yet, so I just Google it. And it's really the definition of getting raw materials and putting them together to produce something, a new product. And when you start thinking about that, yes, you talk about extracting, you talk about maybe smelting, but also about producing, processing, and making something new. And that actually implies the businesses I just mentioned, right? So when we are thinking about everything that has happened, and a good question yesterday at a session was, are we talking about building more manufacturing in the United States because we want more companies doing manufacturing, or because we want to increase jobs? And I think the deeper question there was very important, because since 1950, the number of manufacturing firms have not changed. It's the same. However, they've been actually employing a third of the jobs they had back then. So, and it gets you thinking, what is the definition? What is the lens of manufacturing that we are using right now? So I just wanted today to really kind of set the stage with us opening our minds to think maybe manufacturing is not the same old factory. Maybe manufacturing is going to be different in this new age where technological advances are actually helping processes and industries to be more efficient. And also think that it doesn't have to be the big saver of a town, but it has to be different levels of manufacturing that actually support the growth of jobs, economic output, and at the end of the day, help that American dream that we're after.
Thank you for that. Ashutosh, Chris, is there anything you want to add to that as we set the scene for what today's conversation may look like?
The only thing I would do, I think the reference to the industrialization of this country, I think you have to go back historically, and Sid referenced the 1800s. The first industrial revolution was when? Right after slavery, 1870. In terms of us beginning to use steam and mechanization to do a lot of things that people were doing. And then that led us into that kind of period when, guess what happened? We created light bulbs and electricity. So we went from steam to electricity and began to have power to do work and have machines really be a lot more efficient. And then coming after World War II, when we really had to move to, we were also coming from this rural economy to a more urban industrial connectivity world. And so then as we moved into after World War II, kind of the first stages of computerization. And so now as we think about what some call Industry 4.0, Industry 5.0, where all this advanced technology comes together, all the AI, all the Internet of Things, all these things come together to revolutionize how we do work. And so who's going to do all of this? Is it big companies or is it small companies? It's going to be small companies. Most of the companies in this country are, like 99% of the businesses in our country are small and medium-sized businesses. And so that's who's going to do the work, because they're a lot more nimble than I am in my company. Yeah, as we talk about this revolution, you'll hear a lot about AI and the need for power. And so probably over the next decade, I'm going to build as much power in 10 years as I've built over probably almost 100. Okay? Because that's just how fast the demand is growing, and then all the other implications in terms of all the innovation, all the supply chain activities, and a lot of times we forget to think about, because we think we have enough workers, but we really don't. In terms of the numbers, but also the skills in terms of, and that's what small and medium-sized businesses bring to us in terms of this economy that we want to make sure is thriving. And then the last thing that I'll say, and I'll give it back to you, is this thing I think a lot about. It's called income inequality. As we have gone through all these revolutions, guess what? The top 1% is making about 139% more than the lower income. So this disparity is creating a lot of the social ills that we think about. And so I think as businesses and companies, yeah, as I make sure I respond to the needs of my shareholders and all of my stakeholders, I've got to make sure I'm thinking broader about all the bigger implications of these revolutions to make sure that everybody benefits from the revolutionary conditions that are occurring and have the opportunity to seize and thrive off of all those opportunities. We've not done that historically. We left a lot of people behind who did not participate in this industrial revolution and economic opportunity that's existed in this country. We're going to need everybody to benefit and participate and help us make sure that we're addressing all the needs that we have to in this great society that we're a part of. I can go on, but I'm going to stop there.
Satoshi, I want to go to you next, but I might pull on that thread and weave these items in there. Excellent points there on income inequality, and we'll talk more about inclusive economic growth. You made great mention around AI. I think, when people are thinking about AI, they're thinking about what Meta and other of the biggies are doing. And the small business piece or the small and medium-sized business piece gets lost in that, exactly what you talked about, Chris. Satoshi, on that, we're often overlooking how vital the small and medium businesses are to equitable job creation and innovation. And in that context, how do we unlock their full potential?
So let me tell Justin, thanks. Let me start. I think we need a bit of a reframe. It's actually not big versus small. In fact, there can be no big without the small and medium size. The Caterpillars of the world, the J&Js of the world, the P&Gs of the world, none of them are going to be able to compete effectively without the support of the small and medium-sized enterprises, right? If you look at small and medium-sized enterprises, currently in the United States, they employ 6 out of every 10 workers. 6 out of every 10 is small and medium-sized enterprises. If you look at the contribution to the national value add, it's about 40%. The big opportunity set, though, is that if you look at the productivity of those companies today, it's about half of what it is for the larger companies. And I think finding ways to be able to unlock that productivity is going to add about 5 points of GDP. Right? Think about the impact of that 5 points of GDP to the world's biggest economy and the trickle order impact on how much of that really flows through to the bottom line of every single American household. I think it's actually going to solve. So I would come back and say it isn't small versus large. It is how the two actually go together hand in hand. But this is, we talked about the next industrial revolution. The next industrial revolution is actually here. It is going to be driven by AI. And AI, the advantage of AI is that the amount of the ability to use technology has become a lot easier. The cost of being able to use the technology is dropping by the day. And really, the ability to drive benefits from it is really dependent on leadership and technology, not on technology per se. So therefore, it's the biggest opportunity that small and medium-sized enterprises have to be able to catch up on this productivity gap.
We had an interesting point. We had Dr. Michio Kaku at one of our conferences a few years ago, and I think the major question the audience has was, is AI going to replace my job? And he said no, but someone using AI is going to replace your job. So if you're not doing it today, you're already behind.
Well, see, people have to be honest about that. AI is going to replace jobs. And I mean, it's going to, and we have to be honest about that. It's going to create more jobs, but jobs will be eliminated because of AI. And I mean, you have to tell your workforce that and be honest about it. Now, yeah, it's going to help some have more enjoyment at the job they currently have. But yes, jobs will be eliminated because of artificial intelligence.
As part of that, when we look at bringing small and medium-sized businesses to scale, I mean, I think there's an appetite here to dig in a little on the AI side. How are they doing that now, and how could they be doing it now if they're not? And that's open to anyone that wants to take a stab at it.
So let me go back to the job creation, right? I think I agree with Chris. So you go back to the history of the Industrial Revolution, and you can pull out quotes around how catastrophic it is going to be for human beings once the combustion engine got introduced. In reality, what happened is horse carriages got replaced by automobiles and cars. If you look at the history of technology for the last 150 years, Empirically, the evidence would suggest that technology does does displace a certain type of job, but it lands up creating more jobs in a way that we can't really understand and fathom today. But if you go back to say, where does technology really come in? How does that really impact? One math equation is around, you look at the importance of GDP, which is one of the factors that drive it. GDP simply is a multiplication of two factors, the size of the workforce times the productivity. And the way to be able to drive productivity is, if you think about the size of the workforce and say you've got a certain number of hours, you can increase that. You can increase that through immigration. You can increase that through greater participation of women in the workforce. Participation of other underrepresented segments within the workforce is one way to do it. But the biggest factor there is actually to be able to drive up productivity. If you go back and look at the United States post the Second World War and said what really contributed to the success of the United States, it's the fact that the United States has been the world's biggest productivity engine. But that productivity growth has actually slowed over the last 20 years. Right? And so the question is, how can we use this technology now in a way that allows us to build that productivity as we go forward? And how can we do it responsibly in a way that as certain number of jobs get displaced, we are able to reskill those individuals and quickly create new jobs that we cannot actually even imagine what those jobs are going to be today.
But I would add, I completely agree. I think technology is such a key component of what is going to come next. And we keep talking about AI, we keep talking about technology solutions. But I think going back to your point is, if we're talking about an equitable distribution of wealth, or really talking about who is going to be impacted by this, and you talk about a reskill set for employers, it's like we're going to be, if we don't do it in a comprehensive way that includes everybody, is actually going to be leaving behind who was left out in the first revolution, right? So we really need to start thinking through, how are we using this technology for the small businesses to be more efficient? Mm-hmm. How are we really using technology tools to help them be more productive and help the bigger companies get to their goals without forgetting the actual community, right, that is using? Every time I hear about AI or technology, it's like the digital divide is so huge between all these companies that are doing it, the big ones that are doing all the efficiencies, strategies, and are really implementing all these tools and AI, and obviously decreasing the number of jobs. But then for the smaller businesses that are building into that and providing and getting ready to be the pipeline of supply for the supply chain, it might not be as easy. Even accessing all those procurement opportunities, even connecting with federal and state contracts, that everything is online. So I think it has to be a very concerted effort of bringing that technology throughout the spectrum of sizes in the business industry.
Yeah, but as you were saying about small businesses, AI has the opportunity for small business to be more efficient. Mm-hmm. Because as you measure that increment of work, there's going to be greater productivity, there's going to be greater output with that increment of work if it was normalized. I mean, there's going to be greater output. And so, but I do think we have to be honest just about the reality of it. And yeah, there's a lot more to be learned. And so Andy Jassy, CEO of Amazon this week, created a firestorm by saying, it's going to eliminate jobs. I guess he wasn't in Venice at Bezos' wedding. So, because he was focused on what was happening in the company. But I think that's the reality of kind of where we are, coming to grips with it and making sure that we all fully embrace ourselves and incorporate this technology and the additional technologies that are coming. So yeah, we can create more opportunities. We can be more productive. We're gonna be more innovative. We're going to create more things, more widgets. But we can do this in a way that also benefits the greater and the broader nature of society.
And so how exactly do we do that? I mean, we know what the assignment is,
yep.
But how do we truly support the scaling of small and medium businesses, whether it's technology, AI, whether it's access to capital, access to contracts? I mean, we know the assignment. What are we thinking? What are the minds up here thinking of how we do that? And maybe, Ashutosh, you can talk a little bit, like you do in the book, about some of the things that you're seeing, trend lines you're seeing, and and ways that we might be able to accomplish this.
Sure. So I think you mentioned the titanium economy. The reason we framed the phrase titanium, if you look at innovation in the United States, Chris, as you mentioned, everyone tends to go to the West Coast and say, look at all the market caps of those companies. In my work, been based in the Midwest for many years, in my work, what we started to see is the heartland of America, really, there is a set of companies, and we call titanium because they're durable. It has nothing to do with the metal. It is just a way of framing it. These companies are durable, they're resistant, they're all around us, and yet we don't see them. And let me give you, typically I'd put up the names of a number of these companies and ask to see whether folks actually recognize any of them, right? Those are companies like Graco, right? These are companies like Heiko. These are companies like Corvo. None of you might recognize a single name, but let me share this with you. Graco is a Milwaukee-based company that started after World War II. They're focused around high-temperature metals and precision. Today, if anybody has actually recently had somebody in the family has had a baby, the baby's bracelets that are used for identification actually come from that company called Graco. If you look at a company called Corvo, any of you who's been using a cell phone today, and you've been texting and speaking on your phone at the same time, the reason you're able to do that is because of the company called Corvo, right? And if you've been using your satellite map for navigation, and if you're thinking it's back to Starlink and Elon Musk, the reason that's happening is because of a Florida-based company called Heiko, which actually provides all the components that allows us to map and be able to link to satellites. And these are just 3 examples. There's actually 4,000 such companies today in the United States. 80% of them are private, and 90% of them have been around for more than 70 years. Why does it matter today? That these companies might be 10% of the workforce, but they drive about 60% of the R&D, if you look at patents. They drive about 60% of the exports of the United States today, right? So if you look at the really strategic importance to the US economy, it's way, way much more than what it is. Back to what are the constraints, we said there's 3 things. There's talent. How do we continue to make sure that there is a talent shortage today? And how do we make sure that we're able to continue to provide very, very high caliber talent into these places? They would like to do, 90% of them would like to do skills-based hiring. Only 20% of them have the capability to do that. Second is capital, right? Capital, because if you look at where venture capital goes, the current venture capital model doesn't fit the profile of the risk-return profiles of titanium economies. And the third one really is capabilities. And this is where it brings us this innovation, this access to markets, this use of AI, and so on. But I'd say those are the 3 most important constraints, and we teed up a number of ideas around what companies can do, but also what the government can do to be able to support those companies.
I was going to go to you and ask what you're seeing, even drilled down one more level on the very localized businesses that you're working with. How are we seeing them scale, not scale? What are they asking for? You have a multitude of partners you work with. What are you talking about with them to put these resources into their hands to help them get to be in the next titanium economy book?
I think it's great. Actually, you were talking about those 3, and we used to go with 5 C's. So it's interesting to kind of follow up on that. But I do feel like what small businesses need to actually continue growing and become part of this titanium economy or support that titanium economy companies is really, we call it the 5 C's, the an ecosystem of support to help small businesses to thrive. And I think part of what we are seeing with these small businesses is how do we get them with the right coaching to help them guide through the process of what needs to be happening internally? How do they give them the access to capital you were mentioning, which is throughout the spectrum, the need, but also those connections to markets. And the access to connections, which is a big part of what the small businesses need right now. They don't have the right connections to access those big contracts or to find the right capital source. So that is the third one. But the other 2 are climate, which has a lot to do with regulation and bills and the government role into how they foster and support the creation and growth of small businesses. And the 5th one is culture. How small business friendly we are in the cities, in the towns, in the state, in the countries, to really support their effort. And I think it's really interesting because as we're putting together, and you probably all can see yourselves in one of these C's, like I said, like you can always support a small business or a mid-sized business to grow if you are, depending on your skill set, in one of these Cs. And we want to make sure that we are able to bring those solutions to the very small businesses on the ground, because our partners are supporting that, right? So we have a lot of organizations providing that coaching to guide them through what it means to access procurement opportunities. What does it mean to get certified? What does it mean to actually be able to grow your manufacturing business or your business to support as are accessing some of that supplier diversity program? But we also have a lot of the community development financial institutions or lenders that are providing that capital for those that are not traditional, funded by banks. So it is really, how do we make sure that we are providing these small businesses with all the tools they need and with all that ecosystem of support so they can grow and continue supporting this bigger companies. So I think when we talk about an ecosystem and manufacturing companies and industrial revolution, we're talking about rethinking and really reimagining what it means to build all the mountain of support or the companies building on each other's strengths to really have an impact in the economy.
Thank you for that. It sort of leads me to a question for you, Chris. You mentioned, I think you're going to do more power in the next 10 years than you have the last 90. I think I might be off on my numbers. Are you all doing anything, or is your industry doing anything to help those partners, those small and medium-sized business partners that are going to help you get there? I don't imagine you're going to do that all on your own.
We're going to do it with a lot of partners. And yeah, I mean, because my principal focus is making sure that my 9 million customers each and every day have the reliability and the service that they expect from me. We had storms go through the Southeast last night. We responded overnight to make sure the power was back on before people got up to work and to go to school and to begin to start the July 4th holiday weekend. So along with doing that, we also want to make sure that, we're utilizing more small and medium-sized businesses to support this construction work that we have going forward. I think you guys talked about kind of the big issues that they face. A lot of it's capital, just access to capital, access to affordable capital. And yes, one of the things I think we as companies have to do, and it fits into our culture and the commitment that we have, is to make sure we're very involved in the communities, but we're doing things to grow the economy. We issued about $1.5 billion sustainable equality bond back in 2022. And we used proceeds from that to provide capital for small and medium-sized businesses. And I think those are the kind of things that we have to do beyond our principal obligation and responsibility as a business. But how can we, and the bond was oversubscribed. I mean, so it was not like it was a undersubscribed, market didn't receive it very well. But the market received it incredibly well, oversubscribed, and that was about $800 million worth of financing that was made available to small and medium-sized businesses. And we have continued and will continue to do more things like that to make sure we're growing more small businesses, partnering them with us, giving them access to connections, but also access to capital to help grow their business, make sure we're providing them with mentorship and other things to help them be more efficient and run their businesses better. But I just think and a lot of businesses do that, so it's not just us. But I think as we think about where we are in this world today with all the challenges we do face, and we can't rely solely on government to do these kind of things, I think there's an obligation that we as in the private sector and businesses must have to make sure that we are, as we say in our company, being bigger than our bottom line, that we are doing the community things because we want the community to be better because we live and work there, and demonstrating that very clearly in terms of those kind of community investments that we're making to make sure that the community is better and that we're helping the individuals and helping that economy grow at the same time.
You touched on it, and I know the fault line well. We are living it every day, so I'm going to do everything I can to keep us from going over.
Oh no, jump in. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, you mentioned some good things there. Really glad you mentioned the bond program.
Yep.
We've been talking about access to capital as a barrier. We know that historically, marginalized communities have a much more difficult time accessing capital. We've talked about inclusive growth. So, again, how do we put that in the blender and make it make sense. I mean, how do we find, given the political climate we're in, ways of identifying more capital resources for those that perhaps are some of the most nimble, most innovative, yet have the most difficult time accessing capital? Ashutosh, I don't know if there's any.
Sure, absolutely. Let me put a provocation on the table here. I think we talked about the importance of creating an inclusive economy. The best way to do that is to actually do it through manufacturing, right? If you go back and look at it, typically, I think there is a view here that we should give up on manufacturing in the United States. That's absolutely and totally wrong. If you go back and look at the typical jobs today, they create about 2.5 times the job, the wages are about 2.5 times what it is in the services sector. When companies move in and start to create well-paying jobs, it has what we call an amplification effect on the greater economy, right? There's a number of places like South Carolina and others where you see that the per capita GDP of the region has doubled over a period of like 20 years because the number of manufacturing companies moved into that area and started to create that. And then on wealth creation, I mentioned HEICO as an example. That's an example of a company where a number of people who have actually been working on the shop floor, like shop floor workers, have created more than $1 million of savings in the 401ks because of the success of the companies that HEICO has had, because it's one of the most productive and competitive companies on the planet. Therefore, I go back and say, the pathway to an inclusive economy is actually going to be through manufacturing. Doesn't mean it's the only answer, but I think we cannot give up on manufacturing. We've got to double down, and we've got to use this as an opportunity to be able to continue to reinforce the strategic importance of that to the United States.
No, please,
Yeah.
please.
No. What I say is I completely agree. I just feel like we need to open up in the definition of manufacturing, and I think it goes back to the small businesses of. For me, like I have one of our businesses that is a tamales factory, right? And they started literally in their house as a side business, and then they had a food court and a food truck, and then they actually went to a kitchen incubator, and they are now actually a supplier for the Warriors Center, the Chase Center back in San Francisco, right? So it is actually the amount of product they're building, and they have the sales in wholesale, and that is not the traditional manufacturing we have in our minds. So I think it's important for us to think through how do we get there to actually support that, or how do we help these small businesses access these supplier diversity programs or these procurement opportunities that have so many technical complexities for them to really get there. So right now, so I think I just bring that point of we have to really lean in to who is doing businesses, who is starting businesses in this country, and how do we help them grow. And we know that, we saw between 2021 and 2024, 21 million new businesses applications, right? And right now we have 24% of the minority-owned small businesses are eligible for federal opportunities, but they only get 3% of the federal awards. So there is already a lot of smaller manufacturing that could be supporting the economy and building it, and we just need to lean into what is needed to really help them grow and access the capital, access the solutions for them. And there are different organizations on the ground that are doing it. So I guess what I wanted to say is, let's not think only to bring those big ones, but also how do we build from the ground up.
And do you think as well, I sort of set the question up to be access to capital, but you can throw as much money as you want. Sometimes it fixes the problem. Most of the time it won't. How do we also skill these entrepreneurs? And I think tying it back to AI, I think you said something, Carolina, that there's just this knowledge gap out there of what it really means, how it could be implemented in any size enterprise. So outside of capital investment, what are some of the other things that we need to be doing collectively to ready small and medium-sized enterprises for the next jump in their life cycle? And I'll put that to any of you.
As I said earlier, I think there's a lot of mentorship. You don't just give them the access to capital, but how do you run a good accounting department? How do you make sure you're managing your supply chain logistics business in the right kind of way? So making sure you do those kinds of things. And we do that as a company, but also there are a number of small business associations and minority supplier development councils all across this country that are doing the same thing. So, and a lot of businesses do that. So I think collectively, as more of that happens, it puts these businesses and companies in a much better place. At the same time, there are a lot of industry leaders that are retiring, and they go to start small businesses. So they have the skills, they've run big companies, they have the discipline, they have the strategic planning capabilities to run these companies. So, and then there's a group of retired executives that are available to be consultants. And so the resources are there. We have to just make sure we match them up with these new small and medium-sized businesses to give them the resources they need to be successful.
I'm glad you brought some of that up. I'm going to do a shameless plug for groups like Carolina's, for groups like the National LGBT Chamber. Disability In is in the audience. National Small Business Association is here. I would talk about Women's Business Enterprise National Council. There is a business organization that is interested in your company or multiple, and we do a lot of that education as well. So, Satush, is there anything you want to add on that before I get to my final question? Then we're going to open it up to all of you for a few questions.
No, I think access to capital will constrain. Let me go back to, I think, your question around, is there a real disadvantage for small and medium-sized companies on AI? Now, let me separate out. There's going to be a small, very, very small handful of companies. You can count them on two hands, the number of those companies, which will invest billions of dollars in AI. These are the companies that are developing the large language models and so on. But for 99.9% of the other companies, it is really the application of AI. And because of how nascent AI is today, it is not about those companies having a head start in terms of the application, but it is really about companies that are experimenting and learning. This is what we're saying. The fastest learners on the application of AI are the companies that can win. And this is where small, medium-sized companies, the companies that actually adopt this, don't think of this as an existential threat, but think of this as a lifetime opportunity and start to experiment, are actually going to see the biggest benefits.
So we're going to just go right down the line here on this and sort of ending where we started with inclusive economic growth. Let's just go into the world of possibilities because we're in the world of possibilities. In your opinion, what would be the most catalytic policy or ecosystem investment that we could make right now that would really drive economic inclusive growth?
You really jumped in on that one, didn't you? What's the biggest idea? I think there's so many individuals in our economy that have incredible ideas. Getting them to a point where they have access to the capital to fund their ideas, I think could spur another magnitude degree of innovation all across the communities that are in this country. So many people simply just don't have the capital to fund their ideas. There's more to be done there, but I think if you say, what's the biggest thing? It's capital, it's the resources. You look at the Silicon Valley, what funds the activities there? All the angel investments, all the hedge fund activities, all the financial investments that go into all these wonderful ideas. And that's what got it started. And that's what sustains this innovation that's occurring all across this company. To make that available to more businesses is giving them more access to this funding, to this capital, to fund their ideas as well.
Justin, we laid out like 26 ideas in the book that you mentioned. Let me pick one that I think is particularly close to my heart, which is how do we make employee stock options, if not employee equity ownership, much, much, much easier for companies, right? It's an idea which can actually then start to combine the advantages of having employees start to benefit from the advantages of being able to create companies that are actually competitive. For a small handful of companies that have done that, they've seen a lot of benefits, but there's a number of different hurdles that come in the way of being able to do that. If we were able to consistently do that, it would be a massive unlock for the economy.
Well, the book is The Titanium Economy. You should read it. and you can find it on McKinsey & Company's page, and I'm sure you can find it on Amazon as well, but it is absolutely fantastic. Carolina.
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously there are a few options, but I think just being very intentional about an inclusive public-private nonprofit partnership. I think it's important to think that, yes, access to capital is important, and there are ways to leverage federal funds with the state funds and with the partners on the ground to support the small business growth. I want to just really quick to mention, like, back in California, there is, some of you have heard probably about the State Small Business Credit Initiative that is coming with, actually has deployed over $3 billion in capital since its renewal in 2022. And in California, there is the capital component, but there is also the technical assistance component, where we are not only adding to the support, like the regular capital products through the CDFIs, but we are also adding over 70 partners to work with the small business to make them capital ready. And I think that just considering these partners on the ground as economic development partners that could really help guide these businesses into the process, it's really important. And then the second step would be how to get them ready for these procurement opportunities. Even if there's been a lot of conversation about bonds and how do we kind of create those capital products that would get them to that, to that option. So I think it's just being more collaborative, creative, and really making sure that there are already systems that could be leveraged.
Wonderful. Audience questions? Right here in the green blouse, you were first up.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. And I hadn't heard of the titanium economy before, so thanks for that. I look forward to reading your book. I'm a senior correspondent at Wired Magazine, and my question is around the workforce. I have two questions, actually. The first is the future of manufacturing, manufacturing workforce protected by unions, and particularly in small businesses or privately owned companies, and how do you see that changing, since a lot of manufacturing in the U.S. is rooted in, labor protections and unions? And my second question is, what kind of attitudes are you seeing from younger generations like Gen Z towards manufacturing? I don't remember the exact stat now, but there's like some statistic out there about how many young people just want to be YouTube influencers. And so, if the future of inclusiveness in the American economy involves manufacturing and doubling down on manufacturing, then do younger people want those jobs? What does that look like?
Maybe we address the first one here, and that second one we'll do in the next panel. Who would like to take a stab at those two questions?
In terms of the union, and we have unions, and we work very collectively, great partners with the union in the work that we do. They get the advent and the penetration of innovation and technology, and know, there will be more things that will be done by machines rather than by individuals. So they acknowledge that transition that we will see in our economy. And we acknowledge that in our labor negotiations and all of our work practices. Some industries may be more challenging than others, but I think as we work collectively with our unions, there's great acknowledgement and great partnerships about, one, how do we make sure we make the company successful? And then how do we make this transition for more technology, more innovation, more automation in terms of the jobs and work that will be impacted. So you just got to be open and having those kind of conversations. You'll see more contention in some industries versus others. The Gen Zers, a lot of them just don't want to do that kind of manufacturing work. They've been growing up on joysticks and Game Boys and all those kind of things, and going into factories is not simply what they get excited about doing. And the thing is, I do think as you think about manufacturing, there's going to be a lot more robotics anyway in manufacturing anyway, so it's going to be a lot less people. As we think about onshoring and bringing jobs back, are we going to bring the garment industry back to this country? Probably not. A lot of that's going to be mechanized and robotics, and it's going to be done so incredibly different than it ever has been before. But I think from the service side, from the technology side, you're going to see just enough growth and opportunities for those Gen Zers to do the kind of work they desire to do. But I think it's not going to be them getting excited about manufacturing. At the same time, last thing I'd say, we do a lot of communications about the importance of line workers and who keeps the power flowing, and making sure we let them know what the opportunities are, what the wages are, what a great job it is. And so, yeah, I think all across manufacturing and in our industries, we've got to communicate and tell the stories. These are good jobs. These are good careers. These are ways you can take care of your family and build wealth for yourself. So we all have to do that to make sure that we're being as attractive as we can for as many workers as we can.
Let's see if we can get two more questions in here. You were actually up second last, and then this gentleman back here in the green or blue stripe polo.
Hi, my name's Laura Nozel. I work for Edward Jones, and my question's around the Great Wealth Transfer. We know that a lot of baby boomers are current owners of small businesses. Is the next generation ready to pass the baton and take on those small businesses? Or what is your opinion on what's going to happen as they transfer from the baby boomer generation to the next generation?
So let me go back to the titanium economy. I think as we mentioned, we said about roughly 5,000 companies, 90% of them are private, and many of them around for multiple years. There is indeed a generational transition that's happening, and we are seeing two things. One is, as these companies, we're starting to see more and more, these companies operate in 100 different specialized segments. Inside those segments, we are starting to see more and more consolidation. We're also starting to see private capital that is coming in and starting to play a role here. Many cases, they're working side by side with entrepreneurs. It is not private capital that is coming in, ripping out the costs and leaving the company, but they're working to be able to strengthen the companies, and the exit thesis really is around innovation and growth and around value creation. So we're seeing a bit of both of those. Time will tell. Private capital activity has been depressed for the last 2 years for reasons we all know, but I think this is something that we should watch.
I would add one thing to that too. There's a growing trend among entrepreneurism by, excuse me, where we have workers that are purchasing from the baby boomers. So we're seeing a great deal going on in that, and I think we'll continue to see that.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. We are seeing a lot of more employee-owned companies, so there is a lot of interest into how can your employees buy the company. Actually, we were just recently in one that is a delicatessen being out for 100 years, and the kids and grandchildren didn't want to keep it up. So the employees actually bought it. And we're seeing that trend doing that more. And also the matching of, there is actually, when I was a business consultant many years ago, there is a question of people, I want to be an entrepreneur, I'm not entirely sure what to do. So there is a matching opportunity with businesses that have a proven business model, but they don't have a generational, like assets that right now that they can actually take advantage of, so they could sell. So there is a lot of a market for those two in the economy.
Last question.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a fascinating conversation, by the way. But the question I had, and I think Chris mentioned, 90% of the U.S. labor force is basically employed by small and medium-sized businesses. And if you think about kind of the current economic policy that's being put in place right now, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. You guys deal with small businesses. Chris, you run a business. How do you deal with that? The groups that we talk to are, we say, we don't know what our supply chain is going to look like over the next, X amount of years or whatever. And this is probably maybe a more short-term problem. But I'm curious what you hear and what the climate is like when you talk to, kind of these small and medium-sized business owners. What are they saying? How do they reflect on these kind of uncertainties?
It's an interesting place where we are. There's an incredible degree of uncertainty. There's an incredible degree of chaos and confusion. There's also an incredible degree of opportunity. When you look at the capital budgets of most major companies, 5-year capital CapEx is billions and billions of dollars. And so that says that even in the midst of this uncertainty, there's hope and opportunity and optimism into the future. And so companies are betting on those opportunities into the future. And as we think about supply chain constraints, that means that more has got to be produced. More has got to be produced in different places. And so people see opportunities. And so, yeah, it's an interesting period, and you see, like I said, I think it speaks to the resiliency of this economy that's in this country. Also, I think it speaks to, as challenging as it is, the resiliency of this country, and knowing that we will see our way through all of this, and keeping that hope and optimism going in the midst of chaos and uncertainty.
Well, can we please give our panel a round of applause? Carolina, Ashutosh, Chris, thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you to the Aspen Ideas Festival, and thanks to all of you for joining us here. Come back if you want to hear what the next generation is doing in leadership back in this room in about 20 minutes, I think. So